is very low, and that means you lost heart in what you're doing. Sonia is saving the world in a different way. Because you're all different. Yet you're all the same entity. The Gallateens. Vera felt a rush of bile at the back of her throat. John, let's take that helmet off now. You wanted the truth from me, didn't you? Here it is. You are the best of the lot. You are the best because of all of you. You're the one who needs me the least. Mila is a Hollywood girl. She's a star. Sonia is a knight in armor. If a man gets in Sonia's way, she will show up like a matchstick. I haven't yet met Bizuka, but we trade a lot of men. Because Bizuka was on the lam. The law wants her. She's into forgery, human trafficking, and bank robbery. You know how hard it is to rob a bank these days? Bizuka, that woman, good God. If you don't stop shouting, I'm going to scream. That's what you always tell me. Always, every last one of you. I've talked to one of you about the other units, and you always break down and scream at me. Except for your mother. Your mother? A female warlord, so paranoid, she could only trust common sense. God help her. Vera put her hands over her ears. We're gonna talk your mother down from up there, Montalban shouted, his face red. That job is not impossible. We're going to talk her down from that impossible. Just get me away from him. Get me away from here. Take me to my husband. something else. The one innovation was the way they'd been brought to life by people willing to believe in them, wanting to believe in them. Herbert had always claimed that she, Vera, had inspired him. Maybe. There was no way for any woman to deny that she had inspired a man. It was true that she had been a girl in distress, demanding rescue. What if an army came? What if the army launched 1,000 ships? What if they won? You're lost in your own thoughts. decades-long sponsor of home decor products. Californian Furniture was of huge consuming interest to Toddy's core fan base. The family firm was a network. Real estate, politics, finance, everywhere. Retail, water interests, and of course, entertainment. A network as strong as the LA freeways. A network whose edges were everywhere, and its center, well, if the family firm had any center, it was Theodora Toddy Montgomery. Toddy's costume cascaded over her gorgeous chair. She wore her stiff support bodice, lace collar, her signature monster hat, her dainty feet just peeping out from under her big petticoats.
Miss Mila Mufflebond will be joining us,
said Toddy. There was a happy patter of applause. Miss Mila Mufflebond was a trooper and a star. Miss Mila Mufflebond could do anything for her family firm. She owed the family her whole existence, and she was loyal and true. She would die for them. If a bullet came for any Montgomery Mufflebond, Radmila Mihailovich would swan jump in front of that bullet with a deep sense. Toddy paused for one long, strange moment. Then she caught up her lost thread and rambled on. Old people were so patient and